Now you're welcome along. We're talking about a book today. The Last Ditch, how one GAA championship gave a sports writer back his life. Now, book titles obviously need to grab people, and this has a certain dramatic frisson. But gave a sports writer his life back is probably not an exaggeration. In the year 2000, Eamonn Sweeney was in great shape. At 32 years of age, he had just published his second novel. He was covering GAA for the Irish Examiner. He was a regular talking head on RTÉ television and radio. He was a young man at the peak of his powers and set for big years ahead. And then pretty much out of nowhere, in June of 2000, with no inkling of what was about to happen, Eamonn had his first panic attack. And it wasn't his last. Travel became a problem, and nervousness blossomed into a full-blown phobia, which for the past 20 years has rendered his world small. In effect, straying too far from home in Cork became off the agenda. And for better or worse, Eamonn made his peace with that. He's been writing successfully about sport in the Sunday Independent and the Irish Independent all these years. He's been a brilliant, fearless voice. He doesn't court popularity, but he has it all the same. And that was that. There was no discernible change on his horizon until a call came from a publisher. Write a book for us, a sequel to The Road to Croker, 20 years on. Write about the GAA Championship 2024. See Ireland. Travel to games. Tell us what you find. And against his own expectations, that's what he's managed to do. How one GAA championship gave a sports writer back his life. Let's talk to Eamonn. You're very welcome.
Thank you, Joe.
Have you been in this building much?
Not in, like many other things, not in many years, you know. No, not probably for a decade and a half, you know. I think the last time I was here was I came in to type up something on the Joe Ward beating Kenneth Egan in the National Stadium, which is going back, you know.
How we touched on this briefly before coming on air. How has the media trail, which you're on at the moment, been, given the difficulties in some respects of the last couple of years? Hasn't triggered some anxiety or fall back into, oh, I don't like this?
No, it's been great. It's been really strange. I mean, you know, I'm kind of going places I haven't been in a decade and a half. I mean, it's been odd in a way. I mean, these are kind of pretty natural pundity type of things that I used to do for years without a second thought, and now I'm kind of plunged back into it. It's a kind of an exhilarating experience in a way. I mean, they're probably routine enough interviews for the people doing them, but for me, they're kind of part of the same old story from the book in a way. You know, it's been fun actually. You know. You know, I mean, I got to do Ireland AM this morning, and, you know, I hadn't been on telly, I'd say, in you know, an decade and a half or something like that, you know, and it was great to be putting on makeup again, you know. I felt like Bowie.
So it's funny, my relationship with you is all in reverse, in that we would review the Sunday papers quite a lot in Off the Ball when I worked there, and so I mean, like several times in that era saying, does Eamonn Sweeney do anything? You know, the production team. And they're like, I don't know, I don't hear him much. I think he's down in Sligo. No, he's down in Cork. He doesn't do much. He's kind of, and I kind of hidden away. And I had assumed that maybe you weren't someone that had this like zest for life, or were, you know, interested in things. And actually, just based on your writing, it can kind of be misleading. You're for someone who went through what you went through, you're very interested in things, and you've a zest for life, and you're kind of a joyful type character, optimistic type character, and so actually going through what you went through is all the more difficult, I would think. You weren't happy necessarily to be.
No, I think that maybe the impression probably went out in the game that we do, that I was a kind of a J.D. Salinger character going, I want to be alone, and, you know, writing my column and withdrawing in dignified silence. Yes. And so on. And people would ring me sometimes and say, do you want to come on a show? And I'd be like, and of course, you see, you make excuses. No, I don't think, you know, I don't think I want to go on a show. I don't do any of that. But yeah, I am. This is the bizarre thing is that I saw, I was suffering. It's a mental struggle. It's mental illness. You can call it that. I mean, I've suffered for great and horrific anxiety, but I wasn't depressed. I'm one of life's enthusiasts. That's why I've been able to write the same column for 19 years, because I always find something interesting. And for example, I didn't travel outside the country for 24 years, and I loved travel, and I love foreign cultures, and I love, Indian films and Brazilian music, and I'm just one of those people who was always going to my kids, come here, have a look at this is fantastic, and I'd hope sometimes in the column I do that as well. So no, I wasn't I wasn't a guy who was like, oh well, this isn't too bad, because I've always been a reclusive kind of a sort. I mean, when I was living in Dublin, I was at every dog fight going, I love going to stuff. So it was crushing from that point of view. I didn't like being, as the hermit of Drisheen,
Yes. Curmudgeon Sweeney there.
Curmudgeon Sweeney, the man who won't lower himself to be appearing on the chat shows, and I kind of felt maybe kind of, people have that idea about me, the man with too much integrity to be appearing in the media. That wasn't it at all. It was, to be honest, it was just that life was a huge struggle,
Kerry, Cork, 18th of June 2000, Killarney. I say, so no great inkling this was coming, bar 2 nights previously you were doing a reading and got something and you took some Xanax.
Yeah, about 2 nights previously I was going in to do a reading. I just had a second novel out, and I was going in to do a reading from that in Cork, and my partner at the time was driving us in, and I got to Bandon and I suddenly felt low, or it was kind of like a mild hangover, or just something. I just found myself saying to her, I can't go on, I'm just off, I want to go home. And it was so odd for me that we went into a doctor in Bandon and he gave us a couple of Xanax and did the reading. But there was no other thought about that. That was a bit odd, because I mean, probably an awful lot of people, it's funny since I wrote this, will say, oh, I had a panic attack once, or, there was a time I was very tired and it got on top of me. So, but on the Sunday then was a game I was hugely looking forward to, Kerry against Cork down in Killarney. Cork had been in the All-Ireland final the year before, went down. Killarney is always a great place to go. And I went in the gate, went into the stand to work myself around to the press box like I'd done to so many press boxes before, and I was hit by this absolute hammer blow out of nowhere. My chest was pounding, I was pouring sweat on my back and my face. My face felt like it was crawling, my hands were shaking, I was paralysed. It was out of absolutely nowhere. I'll never forget it, to be honest. It is vivid to me still. And this was just out of absolutely nowhere, I didn't know what was going on. I think it's important in a way to remember that if you go back, that's 25 years ago. At the time, nobody spoke about mental health or depression or anxiety in the media. It wasn't a thing that you even knew about. My thought was, I'm going mad. And the only kind of reference I had to that was doing King Lear for the Leaving Cert English. I mean, that I've gone mad, or there's something wrong with me. So actually, people have said to me, "Do you think you were getting a heart attack?" And I didn't actually, because I was just, I'm having all the other stuff as well. This overwhelming feeling of dread, and it kind of, for the next 3 months in 2000, it kicked on from that.
Yeah, you describe travelling on a car journey home to Sligo, and traffic lights on the South Ring Road in Cork, and it's like a scene from a movie where what you're feeling is so intense that off comes the seatbelt, door open, and you start running away as if you are escaping, and you stay the night in the Imperial Hotel, and that summer is that's particularly intense. That's like an episode, nighttime, can't sleep, you're watching Euronews repeats over and over again. So that's like an initial intense blast, that summer of 2000.
Yeah, it was horrendous. I remember that's the thing that actually comes back to me. No one else has asked me about this, about the Imperial Hotel. I'll never forget that, staying awake all night with the most horrendous chest pains, and just thinking, am I going to die? What the hell is going on? And it just went on and on and on and on and on. And it was just utterly terrifying. And I went I went to a doctor. I got various varieties of medication. And by the end of the summer, I remember I came back for a Galway Kildare football semi-final. And I was wobbly, but I was okay. And I kind of thought, well, maybe that's the end of it. Maybe, I've licked it. And but all of a sudden, life had been, all journeys from then on were an ordeal. All journeys were, there was a steeling of myself to go anywhere.
You said of that 3-month period where it was especially intense in 2000, there was a lot of crying. But you said not the healthy, cathartic kind. To ask the question everyone's asked you, I'm sure, but people listening will be wondering, there was no obvious trauma, alcohol use, drug use, blindingly obvious reason as to what was causing the issue?
No, I mean, I was a heavy drinker, but I gave up drink 7 years ago and with no effect whatsoever. I've never really been a drugs man, to be honest, Trauma-wise, I mean, I've done counselling and and they do attempt to probe for some childhood trauma. But no, I had a boringly happy, ordinary rural childhood. I had a boringly happy, ordinary rural life. I loved my job. I enjoyed life. It just kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, I've tried to excavate this with and it's to be honest, why I haven't found counselling that helpful is they kind of, you almost feel by the end you want to give them something, and but there's nothing there. It'd be brilliant at the end of the book if this was an American TV series. At the end of the book, I'd suddenly flash back to the terrible thing that happened to me in 1976 and go, and then I knew I was free. No, I mean, I'm in great shape, but whatever it was, I don't know. I honestly think just some people are wired differently. I think there's a genetic thing. There's something there primed to go off.
You talk about the subsequent years then. So you get through that period in the year 2000, but the nervousness over travel does become a phobia bit by bit. And it's very sad, because I did mention in the introduction, you're in your early 30s, life is really good, you're incredibly successful and well regarded, and the RT TV work and radio work, which you say you really enjoyed.
Yeah, I love this.
Yeah. You're like, I stopped doing that because I don't want to take the trips to Dublin. You start turning down offers to do readings. And when is it that playing becomes off the table initially, and then you graduate it right the way through to just everything, because panic attacks happen on these various modes of transport?
Yeah, I mean, I had a terrible panic attack in the airport in Venice a few months before September 11. Which, if it had been afterwards, they might have shot me. I mean, I just threw such a wobbler that I was on a plane on the runway with getting ready to go, luggage loaded. They had to let me off. I just could not face it, and I haven't flown since.
Yeah.
A couple of years later, it was my daughter's christening out in Cape Clear, where her mother is from. Couldn't face the boat going out. Absolutely steeled myself. But, all the way across, all the way back, I was thinking, Jesus, I'd love to throw myself in the water. Not in a suicidal way. I would have hoped someone would have rescued me, but it was just to get away from the pain. Then a few years later, I was going up to a rugby match in Dublin. I was in Galway. Terrible. I mean, the boat thing, actually, at one stage, I was getting a boat from Dunleary to Holyhead, and I had all my luggage loaded on to go to England, and I backed out. I came back off the ferry, I just could not face it. The train went then. I was going to a rugby match, jumped off in panic and left me luggage on, which I had a devil of a job getting back off Éireann O'Dare. But it eventually became so bad that about 4 or 5 years ago, the bus went. I was going with the kids up to the bus in Galway, could not face it. And eventually, 3 years ago, I was getting a short car journey, and I was, can't do it. Things had gone down so badly that any travel had become impossible for me. Bit by bit, my world had shrunk I mean, there was a year I didn't leave Skibbereen. And I think I was in Dublin once in 5 years. Things had just narrowed down to the house.
Yeah. And when you're going through it, what are you afraid of?
nothing and everything in a way, because people will always say to me, did you think the train was going to crash? And I'd be like, well, geez, of course I didn't think the train was going to crash. I mean, trains don't crash, you know. I try to explain it by saying I think that there's two kinds of panic attacks. There's one, I think a lot of people who don't suffer from anxiety would be familiar. Maybe you get it if you're tired, or you might have had a couple of days on the beer at a wedding, or, you know, people have this one, or you're far too warm, and you get that kind of, it's like the kind of madness video for cardiac arrest, you know, the heart pounding and, you know, that thing. But there's another one which is composed of just kind of nameless, free-floating dread. You know, and that is what I used to have. I would, for example, I'd have bought God knows how many train tickets, and bought the train, and walked down and gotten the train and got off the train. Right. You know, and because I couldn't. I felt if I stay here, something terrible will happen to me. You know, geez, I got on and off more buses from Skib to Clon. You know, God knows. You know, usually saying something like, "Oh, no sign of John here" or something. You know, and so as to what I was afraid would happen, I don't know. I think there was one I didn't particularly fancy going ape in front of a lot of people and ending up on TikTok as, you know, mad Irish train man goes berserk. But also there was a fear, I think, that you could go, the mind could go altogether.
Yes, how far do I want to push my
How
mind?
far do I want to push the mind? I mean, the very worst one I had came 2 years ago. I'd spent a year working very, very hard to get back on trains, and I had got back, and I really thought I had turned the corner, and I was getting a train from Galway to Limerick. And for whatever reason, I had the worst attack I'd ever had. And it was the closest I'd ever felt to becoming psychotic. I felt totally removed from the real world. Yes. You know, I felt like I'd gone into some other space, you know, into that space of the danger of raving in public and you know, being you know, and at that stage I was like, I got home.
And what people will find very interesting about the peculiarity of this is that there are times during this period where you're doing public readings.
Well, I'm not doing too many public readings.
Sure, but you had done some.
I probably
spoken publicly.
I spoke publicly at the Castlehaven dinner dance.
Grand. Now, for most people, that's worse than taking a train. So it's odd that some things were okay and other things...
Yeah, I mean, for example, I've come back and I've done this and I'm not in the least nervous. Well, this sounds like the most bizarre thing to say, but I'm not a nervous person.
Yeah.
You know, generally, you know, this does not fill me. I used to love doing telly and all that stuff was a breeze. But for some reason, this had got to me, you know. Yeah, if I could stay within my confines in Skib, I was grand, you know. Or yeah, I'm not scared of, you know, angry dogs or of kind of physical harm or any of those things. But this thing had assumed this enormous kind of shape in my mind, you know, and I wouldn't say I was full of self-loathing, but I was full of self-disappointment. I mean, you know, if you turn back from a dozen trains and a dozen buses and every shape and kind of person is getting on a bus and getting on a train like a normal person, and you're stalking away defeated into the afternoon, it's a bit of a downer, you know.
I had probably a silly question. Why weren't you driving yourself?
I don't drive.
I know, but I thought, well, maybe now might be the time at some stage in the last 20 years.
Well, maybe, but having said that, given that I was also extremely nervous in a car, I think it probably wasn't the time. My daughters who do drive have said to me, now when you're getting this out of the way, would be a good time just to do a bit of you know, driving locally. But to be honest, my nerves were in such rag order with travelling. I think it's probably as well for the nation's motorists that I wasn't behind a large and dangerous motor vehicle, you know.
So I guess we'll come to last year and the wonder in many ways of getting back on the road. Were you, you kind of talk about saying, well, okay, I mean, like, this is just my lot, I guess, but I've got my books and I've got my television, which has my sport and it's my portal to the world, and I got my movies and I got my music and my 3 daughters who it's so evident, you know, you love so thoroughly, like every fibre of your being. That's enough. I couldn't tell. You were trying to almost reason with yourself that this actually is okay. So was it okay, or was there an awful lot of my life is just, this is really weird. This is not good.
Well, I think what keeps us out of despair is rationalisation. And I'm a positive person. So funny enough, I was trying the best I could to say this is normal. This is relatively normal. This is good for me. And I do enjoy my books and I do enjoy my music. And actually, one of the unforeseen consequences, I've spent probably more time with my girls than I would have if I had been working normally, which has been a great bonus, and they've been terrific. But yeah, of course there was a deep disappointment underneath it, but I was trying the best I could not to despair, not to fall into self-pity, not to just throw the hat at it, and just to say, well, this is the hand I've been dealt. I better play it. It didn't occur to me. I mean, of course, now that I've been out there, now that I've done it, I've realised how much I was missing and the extent to which my life was completely, kind of banjacks, really. I mean, if it hit me again tomorrow, I there'd be no codding myself. But in a way, this ability to fool yourself. I mean, I was saying to my daughters, my initial reaction was 10 weeks after the worst panic attack, after I've decided I'd never leave again. Ciara Considine, the editor, rang me and said, we've a great idea. We'll put you around the country. And won't you love that, Eamon, the road to Croker?
Travel, Eamon, travel.
Travel, yeah. You had such fun doing the first book. And I was like, I was informed that what I was doing was called ghosting. I didn't answer any of these emails. I didn't answer any of these phone calls. And someone said they must have really wanted the book. But actually, I think what she was kind of like was, I'm not going to let this asshole blow me off like this. I'm going to make him give an explanation. And in the end, my daughter sat me down and said, look, Dad, you have to stop pretending things are okay, because you really want to do this book. We know you've really wanted to get back and write a book. You wrote books in the past. You haven't written one in years. You're always saying, geez, I'd love to have another book now and I'd appreciate it if I wrote another book. So they said, you can't be codding yourself anymore. If you don't write this book, that is going to be an absolute disappointment. So I said, well, yeah, he said, give it a go. And if you fail, you fail. And I said to myself, well, so I went to a psychologist. I went to a doctor. I went on medication. Now, medication had been a kind of a no-no for me because I'm from a generation who I think believe that you can bull through everything. Put your mind to it. Show no weakness. And don't admit you're bet. Don't admit you're beaten. A lot of people always talk about winning the fight against mental illness, but you're not really. It's not really a fight in a way. It's learning to live with the thing. And work out what's good for yourself. So I did all those things, and I got back to her and I said, I'll do the book. I didn't think there was a hope in hell the book was going to be done. In fact, I remember when I got the advance, I put it in the bank. I thought, well, we're not going to touch that because that's going to have to be given back.
You say of how you improved or how it came to be that you could do what you did last year. The honest truth is, I don't exactly know. My best guess is a combination of medication, desperation, compensation, determination. The tablets steadied the ship sufficiently for me to tackle the problem. I also felt this was now or never. Maybe the explanation is that there is no explanation. It's a curious conclusion, isn't it?
It is, but I think there is. I think there. Yeah, I don't know. I think the medication helped. I think it did help steady the ship. It's something I hadn't tried in years. Yeah. I had tried it before with little success, and I didn't find. I went to I did therapy. I to be honest, didn't really like it, or I didn't think it was much good. But you never know what you're picking up from these things, and maybe, I had a lot of support from my kids. But I mean, even the first day I went to a match, Cork and Limerick and Páirc Uí Chaoimh, the kind of, and on my way out there, I got a terrible panic attack. And the temptation was there, turn and flee. Feck it, this is not going to happen. But then I was like, well, push on, keep going out this depressing long walk to Páirc Uí Chaoimh and see what happens. And for about the first 5 or 6 weeks, it was see how many weeks you get out of it. The thought of it as a book project was still, this was becoming a thing. Do it week by week.
Yeah.
And about halfway through, or even less than halfway through, I did a match between Limerick and Waterford in the last round of the Munster Hurling Championship. And as I left Limerick to go back to Limerick Junction and then down to Cork, I ended up getting the same train that I'd got, the same kind of small train out of Limerick that I got in Galway. And I was in a rush that day, and I was kind of, slightly harassed by stuff. And I got on the train and I thought, if it's gonna come back, it's gonna come back now. And it didn't come back. So I would say that the first half of the book was an endurance test, and then the second half was pure gravy. It was like, if people think to how they felt back when they could get back after the lockdown, and your first outings after the lockdown, this was out of a decade of a lockdown, and then this was the simplest things were filling me with joy, I
can imagine. There's a sudden image of calves released into the grass at springtime or something and trotting out.
Yeah, exactly, except nobody was going to slaughter me for veal, fortunately.
If you go big picture of the summer that you experienced, aside from your own personal battle, I suppose, you witnessed the end of Gaelic football as we knew it.
Yeah.
You saw the demise of the empire. You witnessed the greatest hurling championship in history to date.
I think so.
And then, thirdly, in the acknowledgements, you write, to everyone I encountered along the way last summer, no one I met treated me with anything other than friendliness and kindness. There are an awful lot of nice people out there.
Yeah, there really are, because I think when you shut yourself away and you lock yourself away, and I think it's one reason why I think social media exchanges are often so bitter and so on. It's easy to get an idea of a world that's full of atavism and people backbiting and so on. And then you go out and you go to the games, and everyone you meet is lovely. They're lovely to you. They're lovely to each other. So, I mean, in the world that we live in with Gaza, with the Ukraine, with all these things, it's easy to forget that most people are just, they're out for the weekend. They're having a match, they're with their kids, they're with their friends, and can you imagine any more benign way to spend your weekend than going to watch GAA?
Well, I tell you a point. So I've read all this in the last 24 hours. A point where I turned to the group and said, I'm enjoying this, was where you went to Galway for Mayo Galway in the Connacht final. And I think this kind of captures something about what you've managed to do in the book, which is insightful and enjoyable and very worthwhile. And you had gone to see That They May Face the Rising Sun, John McGahern, the film adaptation of it, which you enjoyed. And you'd taken in Mayo Galway in the Connacht final. And so you're right at one point, the film and the book captured the dailiness of our daily lives, the way they mainly meander on without epiphany or catharsis, and the strange hard-won beauty in that. The GAA, with all these Connacht finals succeeding one after another, 1 year after another, was part of its great slowly unwinding song. That reassuring consistency was a great part of its appeal. It's a very profound thought. And then the very next line is, as I took the bus from Spiddal to Galway the morning after, the final passenger asked the driver if he'd gone to the match. I did my shite, picked the best 15 from those two, and they still wouldn't beat Dublin. It's kind of this book in a bit of a nutshell.
Well, that's Irish life, isn't it? I mean, it's on the one hand, on the one hand, the kind of joy, but on the other hand, the kind of black humour. I mean, my favourite quote of the entire year was the woman who stood up during the awful Derry-Kerry game and went, "Come on, Derry, bore them into submission."
A lot of great stuff is overheard on trains as well, as you're weaving your way around the country. I did love the group of girls sitting next to you, and at one point, when we're into character assassination point of the conversation, which is, the best part of any good gathering on a train, and one girl is saying of the friend who's not there, they're all giving out about. She said to me, "Oh, someday you'll realise all this small town stuff you think is so important doesn't matter at all." And her friend says, "Don't mind her. She thinks she knows everything since she moved to Killarney."
Yeah, I just loved that. I mean, and actually, that's funny enough. When I did the last book, I missed all this because I used to have my headphones on the train.
Okay.
But what you hear is fantastic. And I don't know whether I'm kind of lonely or needy looking, but nearly everyone that sat in beside me during the thing, wanted to tell me their life story or something. And there's a great unguarded Irish thing. People talk away on a train, and you hear everything,
Yeah.
And I think it's a great thing in a way, because nobody thinks anyone is going to say to them, shut up, be quiet, or so on. I remember like Donald Macaulay, who was a great writer about the immigrant experience in London. He said one of the actually he was in Northampton, but the immigrant experience in England. He said he could never get over the fact that going into an English pub and there was no conversation going on. Whereas Irish life is a constant talk.
Another train journey. I'm in Bray, said a woman in her 40s who seemed a decade older than her companions. I wish it would gentrify faster. It needs some restaurants, and there are still a lot of council estates. There were murmurs of sympathetic assent at both her plight and Bray's. A younger woman chipped in. Where I am is very nice. Some people say it's working class, but it's not. It's just not.
I know, but to hear this is just fantastic,
I can see you writing. Keep talking. Everyone keep talking.
Yeah, and I heard so much good stuff that didn't even go into the book.
Sure, yeah.
But if you did nothing except travel up and down on the trains, you'd have a book,
Yeah, God, I can see how you missed that. People watching, eavesdropping, all of that simple stuff.
This is it, and I picked it all up because it was so weird, Joe. I mean, for years I never met anyone or saw anyone outside Skibbereen, and I was never on public transport. I wasn't in that kind of murmur of people in matches. It was a very, I see now, a very limiting thing to me as a human being, and it was just great to get out and hear all this stuff. The most banal conversation to me was a thing of wonder,
Yeah. You do say like people would be, too embarrassed to try hooliganism in GAA. And I guess what you captured various points as well is the relationship between rival fans and how that's still like, it's not twee, like it's not without a certain edge at times, but somehow there's an invisible line that's never really crossed, or certainly not crossed all that often. Like I thought the description of all the Cork fans on the train and you, and one Tipperary fan who looked like Hosier, was not Hosier, looked like Hosier, was great.
I really love that, that this guy gets in there and they're, singing all the abusive songs about Tip, and your man decides, no, I'll stand my ground. And then they start, of course, I'm also so divorced from kind of modern culture because I was never out. And I said to my girls, they were singing this song called Too Sweet for Me, and the girls were saying, Dad, everyone knows this song, and I was like, well, it was new on me, but again, there he was, but he refused to move, and eventually they start going to him, Hosier, give us a song, Hosier, give us a song, and he starts singing, first he sings Dirty Old Town, and they're going mental, they're beating the roof of the train, and it's going,
because he's good, he has a good voice.
Oh, he's a beautiful voice, he's the coolest man of all time, this guy, he's obviously a man that's perpetually singing and calling in public. You never saw such self-assurance in your life. And then he sings Whiskey in the Jar. And it's like, it's like being at a match. And at the end, he kind of stands down at the end of the carriage to receive his due, and they all get off and they all shake his hand. And, it's just I thought poor old Hosier, and then he has to go and see Tipperary losing by a record margin. But I also think seeing this guy, I thought he probably wasn't fazed, Oh,
well, you said when the train pulled into Thurles, he said, welcome boys to the
home of hurling. I just thought, that is the coolest man I'd ever seen in my life.
And when the Cork fans would get back into chants about how much they hate Tip and Tip are shite, they said, but not you, Hosier.
Not you, Hosier.
You're all right.
They really had become fond of him,
that is a magic, isn't it, that we have here?
It is an absolute magic. I mean, the thing where I was at the semi-final, Cork and Limerick, with myself and this guy called Finbar, who struck up this, brief but very passionate relationship watching the match. I mean, we got this Limerick guy, and as the game is slipping away from Limerick, he's getting more and more abusive about Cork. He's getting really, really cross and insulting, And Finbar thinks this is great crack, and he's throwing it back at him. And your man is a hardy-looking boy, He is, you wouldn't kind of, bump into this lad on the street. And he had two guys with them as well. And at the end of it, he makes a beeline for us. And I'm thinking, perhaps you miscalculated, Finbar, with all the repartee. And he says, sorry about that, lads. I just lose the run of myself at matches, And I marvel at that because it's even going down, remember, to the Cork Limerick game on the Saturday night, and you go past the Goldberg's pub and on the way out to Páirc Uí Chaoimh, and it's full of Cork and Limerick fans, full of drink, kind of young fellas, as I'd say, probably be a handful in another setting. But there they are. No one would ever think that there's going to be hassle. And I mean, I'm a League of Ireland fan, and at League of Ireland fans, the crowd has to be separated. There are bits of the most minor League of Ireland's ground where the visiting fans will not go, and it's it's much. It's much more aggressive and so on. So I just think that's a thing to be cherished. And I know people go, "Oh yeah, you're always going to," but the fans can stand beside each other. What's so big a deal about that? But there is, given the passions which arise, and the fact that it's a country where guys are not backward about getting into rows and stuff. But they won't do it around a GAA match, because I honestly think it would just be viewed at this is. You just don't do it. There's a taboo against it, And it's a brilliant thing.
It's beautiful, yeah.
We don't realise,
Yeah. No, that shone through in the book. This, and I guess your story has been thrown into it, but this, everyone into the one pot, and we're mixing it around, and let's just see what happens.
And we're having the crack, and it's part of a kind of a communal ceremony. And I mean, it struck me what I was doing. I'm not a particularly nationalistic guy, but at this thinking, geez, I'm proud of this. This is us at our best.
Yeah. To weave back from our bus driver in Spittle to John McGahern, you also there are people in your family that you drop into the book. Your mother in particular. Is your mother still with us?
Yeah, my mother is still. Yeah. My mother is still with us. She'll go mental now when she sees this, because you asked that. But
apologies. You made a face there when I asked. I wasn't sure.
Oh no. No. I mean, my mother is an extraordinary woman. I mean, my father left home when I was in my teens, and my mother had to rear a family on the wage of home help with the health board. She's, an extraordinary woman. She's come through 2 bouts of cancer. She survived a stroke.
Yeah.
And in a way, I wanted to just, write this book to pay some kind of tribute to that. And she's been an important part of our lives. Like I was saying, in a way, the cliche thing to do in an Irish book is to go on about your relationship with your father. But I think most of us probably have our primary relationship with our mother, especially in my generation, where your father disdained such kind of petty concerns as child rearing, and my mother is very much is a sports fanatic. My memory as a kid was that it was my mother was bringing me to GAA matches and stuff like that.
Yeah, because you did write in the book, like, to be called a mammy's boy was obviously it was a great insult. But to reiterate the point you just made, you do feel for a lot of your generation.
Oh, it was that
the mammy.
The mother had to pick it up. It's like all these these great kind of mammy cliches. But yeah, the mother had to pick it up, because for my father's generation, you came in from work, you got your paper, and it was don't disturb your father. There was very little bonding going on. So for most of us, I'd say that was the primary thing. I'd never knocked the Irish mammy.
And when things were tough for you in like more recent years, things were tough for her. A stroke in 21. You describe what must be like kind of a heartbreaking conversation where it has affected her speech at the time, and you say barely decipherable words down the phone in the midst of COVID, so you can't go and see her, and you're having to reassure her, no, you don't sound different at all, it sounds fine. And then when you do see her after a year, like, I've not seen this woman that you're very close to and talk to all the time, you write very movingly about that, and you say, when my mother opened the door, my first thought was that all the years had fallen upon her at once. She looked much smaller, her gait had stooped. The moment felt like an unexpected encounter with a long, unseen acquaintance. The dominant emotion was a kind of embarrassment at our inability to find the words to express the changed reality which lay between us. You're looking well, ma'am. Thanks. Why do we find it so hard to communicate everything in those moments? They're hard.
Because they're, I suppose we find them hard because they are hard, you see. And especially that torture of when she'd had the stroke, there was a COVID lockdown and I couldn't go and see her, and the conversations over the phone were difficult, and it was just so... It was so overwhelming. And now, the good thing I can say is that she's now, if you met her now and you hadn't met her in years, you wouldn't know she'd had the stroke. She has absolutely battled back. She sounds like her old self. She acts like her old self and so on. But at the time, I remember going up and thinking, is this the last roundup? You know, and you know,
Well, you said I was convinced in that moment this is our last Christmas together.
yeah, and I was quite upset, and I was there with the kids, going, "Oh, you know, be nice to Granny. You know, this, you know, this might be it." And then that's fortunately 4 years ago, and she's flying around the place since. You know,
Yeah.
she's giving out about referees, and you know, we have a conversation every Sunday night. We go through the weekend sport. You know, it's like a version of the kind of the Monday roundups you do on the radio. You know.
You read your Monday column down the phone to her.
Well, I don't know. She just says, "What were you writing about?" And sometimes I hope you aren't giving out about anyone, you know.
But you can see a sense of humour too, because in those weeks you stay down with her a bit longer after Christmas, and after your breakfast you'd check in on her every morning. "Ma'am, you all right?" And one morning she says, "Don't worry, I'm not dead."
Yeah, that's what she's.
It's like, okay, I won't check on you as much.
Yeah, no, that's what it was, because I kind of thought, oh damn, was it that transparent? But she's from that generation. I mean, they were warriors. She was born in a tiny little farmhouse in Spiddle, you know, back in the days when, you know, times were tough for people, you know, and I think in a way that's the greatest generation. They kind of laid the kind of foundation for what was to come. I mean, Ireland was unimaginably tougher then than it is now, you know.
Yeah, and sport for her is just it's huge.
Sport is huge for her. I mean, I was so delighted in 2020 when they ran the championship, which I always think is the most noble gesture by the players, to play in the winter championship in front of no fans, which must have been. I remember at the time, people were saying they should run it for the old people and so on. Some people were poo-pooing this, but no, that was a very, very real thing. She'd been cocooning all year. This was literally something to look forward to and something to talk about. And I think that was a very noble gesture by the GAA and by the players. There was no money to be made out of it. You know, there was no reason to do it. You know, I'm sure it was an utterly eerie experience for the players, but you know, it was a great thing, I'm sure, for my mother and so many people like her, you know.
You touch obviously on the industry here and there across the book as well. The life of the sports writer. They say writing a column drives you mad eventually.
But I had the good fortune that I was mad anyway.
How often on a Tuesday or a Wednesday with Sunday looming are you saying to yourself, "Oh God, I've nothing. I can't rustle up an opinion about anything"?
No, this is never. Every week I send John Green a list of ideas, and usually there's about 15 ideas in it. I've to this day, I mean, this is what I mean of being one of life's enthusiasts. I've tons of stuff I want to say. You know, we never have a week actually. I'm never rustling up. I start, you know, I'm thinking all week and I'm looking at stuff, and I have tons of ideas. You know, I mean, maybe they're not good ideas. The reader will have to be the judge of that. But you know, if the column ever reads like it's scraping the barrel, it's not because we were scraping the barrel. It's because maybe I'm having a bad week. But no, I can always. There seems to me just so much interesting stuff going on always. You know, I've been doing it for 19 years, and it's never felt like, oh, I must, you know, once more drag myself to the. I mean, the job has been a joy to me, to be honest. You know, when I was a kid, I was one of those kids that I was sitting in front of the All Ireland final writing match reports. You know, and you know, I've loved it ever since I was, you know, sitting up on the side of the ditch covering matches in Roscommon for the Roscommon Herald. You know, it's been a great job for me. You know, I've never felt. I've never got bored with it. You know, there have been times that you get, you know, I don't love the Premier League as much as I did one time, I'd have to say, you know, and obviously football is tough enough, but there's always loads of stuff going on. No, I never do find myself blanking. I mean, even last Sunday was a real example. I'd been told during the week we'd be writing the kind of Liverpool win the title, and so I thought, oh, for once at least, you know, and then kind of, you know, I get a phone call. Put on J Plus, will you see what's happening in Portlaoise, you know, and on goes Dublin Meath, and you have to write about that, you know. So there's always something. Sport. It's a great thing about sport, and you know, you cannot choreograph sport. You can't turn sport into reality TV or scripted reality or anything, because there'll always be something new, you know.
Yeah, you I've read all your work for a long time now. You are very honest in your assessment, and to the point where you have to write things that the individual reading would really not like, you know. Do you ever feel guilt in doing that? I do at times.
I feel guilt.
Guilt's a heavy word, but certain. Oh God, that I just made my living today, ruining that person's day. Ugh.
Well, the one thing I'd say is I don't think I'm particularly merciful on myself. One thing when I was writing the book, I thought, well, I'm going to say what the thing was like, because I'm a writer and I believe you should be honest and precise about the thing. So I haven't been particularly easy on myself in the book. No, I mean, there's stuff I regret. There's stuff I regret that I wrote. And I used to at one stage write a column pointing out all the things I got wrong. Is there anything? Is there any particular hatcheting I regret? I don't think so. I've tried to be honest, and I've tried to, and if I've been wrong about people, I've tried to come back. And then sometimes people thought for years I was hard on Conor McGregor. I was a kind of a minority skeptic about the worth of UFC and McGregor, and that turned out to be right. I do regret. I was unnecessarily harsh on Armagh and this is pre-column on Armagh back around 2004. I was crappy about Armagh. That's one I regretted, actually.
Yeah.
But not for any personal guilt, not because it would have made Joe Kernan or Kieran McGeeney feel bad, because the point too is that a lot of sport is a pretty ruthless game. I mean, I was hard. For example, I was hard on the two English guys in the FAI. Canham and Hill. I was probably very hard, but Canham and Hill I thought were extremely hard on Vera Pauw, because that was their job. They judged that to be right, and there's very few people in sport who haven't made someone else's day. I have I think mellowed a bit as I've got older. I occasionally get actually letters from guys saying, "Oh, you've sold out. You used to hate." You used to be much crosser, and now you're part of the establishment. And so on. But you do regret some stuff because you're wrong a lot of the time. But I have no great fetish about being right. Often guys, if a guy writes to me and say you wrote that and that's rubbish, and I'll sometimes write back and say you might be right.
I don't love the Premier League as much as I used to is a not uncommon refrain, I would say now.
No, and I'm harsh on Man City, but I have absolutely no regrets for that. I think Man City symbolise everything to me that's rotten in modern professional sport. I don't love the Premier League so much because it seems to me, actually, from a political point of view, it's like an education in worshipping money. It makes people make common cause with the worst kind of dictatorships and plutocrats and people like, Jim Ratcliffe in a way sums it up. There's, Jim was a billionaire, getting his jollies from like sacking low-paid people and cutting their food allowance on a Saturday and a Sunday, and one of the awful things that people said it wouldn't happen, or you'll get somebody, a Newcastle or Man City fan, defending the human rights record of a terrible regime because that's my team, and I just feel I just look at it and I find. Yeah, I just find it an awful world. I just think it's part of that whole kind of, plutocratic world, which does so many terrible things to people,
What sport do you enjoy covering and writing about the most?
GAA, to be honest. I started with GAA and the Roscommon Herald. I still, to this day, that's what I get. That's what I get the thrill out of most,
Maybe finish on another personal note if we can, in so much as you're comfortable doing, but you do write beautifully about your daughter Isabel. All three of them obviously are written about, and even when you talk here, you routinely just refer to my daughter said this, my daughter said that. They're obviously
I'm a fond dad,
surrounded. She's on the autism spectrum, but you say she was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. You were told she would need sticks to walk, that she'd be in the smallest 5% of the population. You now describe her as the equivalent of one of those football teams which answered its critics.
Yeah, she has, because all of those, the cerebral palsy was kind of downgraded to something called gross motor delay, and now she's, tipping around the place grand, and she's as tall as her sister, for years, I thought I would die without ever having a conversation with Isabel. She has a thing called selective mutism. She didn't really speak for many, many years. And over the last few years, she's begun to speak.
Okay.
And we have conversations. We had, myself and her sister Lara will be engaging in some, like we watched Nope recently, the Jordan Peele film, and myself and Lara were giving it the old pretentious cinema chat, and Isabel just cuts in and says, I disagree. It was boring, and she will now. It's been a fantastic thing. She has these struggles and she overcomes them, and it's been a wonderful thing to see. She is on the autism spectrum, about which we know very little. I mean, her mother did a course and got a qualification from UCC in it, and what you learned, the more of the literature you read about autism was, the more what you really learned was that they didn't know that much.
Okay.
But myself and Isabel have a I think a very good relationship.
Yeah. You say Isabel sometimes seems to have a direct line to some source of distilled 100% proof joy. Her presence in my life has given me nothing but joy.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Isabel, I mean, people I think who have an autistic child will say this to you, that when an autistic child is happy, they are really, really happy, I mean, Isabel will laugh till, her glasses fall off and the tears roll down her face, and then my glasses fall off, and, I think, geez, I'm in danger of a seizure here, I mean, she just enjoys. I mean, we went to, her birthday was last week, we went to Fota Island to the zoo in the pissing rain, and we couldn't have had a better time. We're walking around drenched to the skin, looking at miserable looking giraffes and drowned tapirs, but yeah, it's been an education for me, and I think in a way that's mellowed me too. I think one thing I do feel is, I don't know, what age are you, Joe?
Clinging to 39.
Oh, you're
not letting go.
You're from a younger generation, but I see the kind of the right wing turn. I mean, in a way, maybe that's my default mode. I worry sometimes. I'm 57. I'm white. I'm male. I'm straight. Maybe I'm kind of prime territory to become one of these right wing guys complaining about wokeness and political correctness and so on. But what I think Isabel has taught me is this whole idea that there's the normal people, and the normal people, everyone else, the gay people, the trans people, the immigrants, people with autism, have to be satisfied with whatever the normal people deem to give them. And it's one of the things I've really felt in recent years. There's no normal people. And one thing I find about Trump and people like that, they've an overdeveloped sense of their own normality, And I think in a way, Isabel, through dealing with Isabel, mellowed me that way, really made me look and see, well, there's not the kind of the normal world and the non-normal world. The term people use is neurodivergent. And I think, to be honest, my own experience, that if, to be honest, I look back at the 32-year-old who, as you say, was doing really well and was, flying along and being on television, to be honest. And I'd have to say what I see is an arrogant prick a lot of the time, an absolutely cocksure, a dude who kind of thought everyone there was instrumental. There's a thing I love in the film Citizen Kane, where Citizen Kane, where boss Jim Giddies, the politician, teaches, he catches him in flagranti and he ruins his thing, and he says to Kane, he said, I thought, he said, you needed a lesson. He said, I thought one lesson would be enough for you. But no, he says, you're going to need more than one lesson, and you're going to get more than one lesson. And I look back and I think it was no harm that the me that I was in my 30s did not go on plain sailing, because I would worry that the me in my 30s might now be this guy in his late 50s going on about wokeness and, I'll tell you who's really getting the problem. It's the straight white male and so on. And there's no harm to be reminded of your own vulnerability. Other thing I'd say, Joe, I know you're kind of winding up, but...
No, take your time. These are final overarching thoughts.
I'm overarching at a fair say. But one thing that did strike me, some fella said, why didn't you write about this years ago in your column? And one reason was shame, and the other reason was fear, and the other reason was that this wasn't talked about. And I owe a huge debt, I think, to guys who were younger and braver than me, guys like Shane Carty, the Dublin footballer, Brian Lenihan, the Cork soccer player, Keith Earls. that this was out there and you could talk about it. And I think that's a great thing, you know, rather than the, you know, the strong man thing of sneering at, you know, the guy who's nervous or anxious. And I think it's been a great thing the last few years. You know, the embrace of vulnerability and the kind of undercutting of the kind of macho thing. And I would hate to see us reversing that under the grounds of everyone, because Trump wins an election in America, this, you know, anti-wokeness is in, wokeness is over, because call it wokeness or whatever you want. The last few years have been at least a step towards recognising that everyone is not the straight white guy, you know. You know, if that's wokeness, you know, wokeness was good, you know.
What's on the bucket list travel-wise?
What's on the bucket list travel-wise? Well, I've been to Paris and Amsterdam in the last 6 months, which was.
If you thought Galway in the rain was good, imagine Paris and
Amsterdam, and yeah, I'd say few people ever enjoyed as much. The bucket list next is getting a plane.
Right.
You know, because I went to Paris and Amsterdam by boat and Eurotunnel, you know, so obviously there's only so far you can go by boat and Eurotunnel. But I mean, I don't know. The plan is, I think when the GAA Championship is over, I'm planning to go to Spain and maybe tip across into Morocco, you know, and yeah, I've loads of places, because this is the thing too. I love to travel, you know. I loved the time I was in the States. I remember spending a month in the States one time, though I won't be going to the States for the next 4 years, you know, to be quite honest, you know. But there are places I want to go. So on the bucket list for the moment is Spain and Morocco, and then we'll, you know, I was talking again. I'm always invoking my daughters, and they'll give out to me for doing so. But I was saying to her, I'd love to go to Australia. You know, I've always loved Australian fiction, Australian cinema. Just Australian rules is a game I like, you know. And I've always thought, but you know, first step first, we'll get to Spain, and we might fly maybe, I don't know, we might fly to Istanbul or something before we start, you know, hitting the southern hemisphere.
Well, what a strange 20 years.
What a strange 20 years is right. And yet the thing is, when you're stuck in the middle of it, this is your normality.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, this is perfectly normal for you, and then you come out of it and you look back and you think, Jesus, that was crackers, wasn't it? You know, but it's nice to be. It's nice, touch wood, to be out the other side of it. I'm out, but I think, you know, I've come much further than I ever did before. I would be amazed to ever find myself back in the same place. You know,
yeah.
It's been a long, strange trip, as the Grateful Dead used to say. You know,
the last ditch, Eamonn Sweeney. Pleasure.
And Joe, absolutely pleasure. Thank you very much.